Welcome to What's Going On in the World, where we analyze current world events in the light of Bible prophecy. But before we can begin with the present, we have to begin with the past. And this is because the present that we experience is simply a culmination of what's gone on in the past. So what we're going to do in the first episodes of this series is to grab a hold of threads that started in the past and pull them into the present, because they are the ones that still affect us today. And when we have grasped a hold of some of these threads, what we're going to do is we're going to knit them together and build a platform or a foundation upon which we can then compare the present with Bible prophecy. So let's to be clear, we're first going to deal with an historical prologue, if you like, leading to the present, and then we can proceed from there to Bible prophecy and the future. So the first thread that we're going to grab a hold of, we need to go back to the year 1944 to a place called Bretton Woods. We're going to grab a hold of the thread there and trace it down to the present day. Now, what happened at Bretton Woods? Well, Bretton Woods was a conference that was organized to sort out the world finances at the end of World War II. It took place in the month of July 1944. What took place the month before? Well, the month before, the Allies launched an invasion of Nazi Europe, landing on the beaches of France successfully. And from that time on, it was obvious that the Allies were going to win the Second World War. So what they wanted to do now was to immediately put into place how the world would function financially after the war. Now, for the purposes of our story, we only need to know 4 crucial things that happened there, that were decided there. By the way, Bretton Woods is a town in the United States state of New Hampshire. So the first thing that was decided there was that all the signatories of the Bretton Woods Agreement would go off the gold standard. Now, prior to this, most currencies in the world were linked to gold for their value. But wars are expensive, and most of the nations who were participating in World War II found that they couldn't finance their war effort when their currency was linked to gold. So they actually had to produce more currency, that's paper currency, than they had gold to back it with. So, the first thing they decided was, in the future, no more currencies would be backed by gold. The second thing that was decided was that in order to get value for their currencies, the signatories to the agreement would link their currencies to the US dollar. That's how they would get value for their currencies. The third thing that was decided was that the American dollar would get its value by linking it to gold. It was the only currency that would be linked to gold. The fourth thing that was decided was that if a nation that agreed to this new system wanted to trade their American dollars for gold, that they could do so. They simply needed to knock on the American gold bullion storehouse and say, we have all these American dollars, we don't want them, we have too many of them, or whatever, and exchange them for gold. Now, what this did was that it basically made the American dollar the reserve currency of the world. It was the currency that everybody used, or the nations used, to trade with and to settle their debts with. And this was a very beneficial system for the American government and the American people. Now, prior to this, the reserve currency was basically the English pound. Now, the way the British Empire operated was very significant. They basically carried the trade of the world in their ships. That's how the British Empire earned its bread and butter. They carried the trade of the world in their ships. They liked to protect that monopoly. They often went to war to protect that monopoly. They often tried to squash competition, etc., etc., but that's how they made their money. Now, what we have now is in the Bretton Woods system, and subsequent to there, we have the American dollar carrying the world trade, not physically in ships, but simply because people bought and sold worldwide with American dollars, and they accumulated American dollars. And they had to accumulate American dollars because that's what they used to trade with. So this was very beneficial to the American people. Somebody has calculated that this system contributes at least 20% or more to the American lifestyle. And I'll explain that in a little bit more how that works. So this system carried on for some time, but then America got involved in the Vietnam War and the Korean War. And as I said before, wars are very expensive. So what America did was they used to just print American dollars to finance the war, which meant that there was a flood of American dollars out in the worldwide system. And this made many nations twitchy or worried because they were accumulating too many American dollars. And when there's too many of a certain thing in the marketplace, they always tend to be devalued. They lose their value. So France was the first one who knocked on the American government's door and said, we want to trade our excess American dollars for real gold. Thank you very much. Now, this was a bit of a shock. It was such a shock that America said, no, we are not going to give you the gold, which is contrary to the agreement which they had with the nations. Richard Nixon was president at the time, and he said, we are closing the gold window. Now, what did the allies of America do, the ones who agreed to this system? They were in a bit of a shock, but they swallowed hard, gulped, and accepted it. They more or less had to, and this is what America was banking on. They were in the Cold War, and all of these nations who had agreed were basically dependent on America for their security. So America got away with it. They kept their gold, but they didn't quite keep their reputation. But now we have a new system by default. We have the system which persists today, where currencies now are floating against each other, and one can go up, one can go down, depending on the economy of each nation. But the American dollar still was the preferred reserve currency that people used to, or the nations rather, traded with one another and settled their debts with. But because the currencies were now floating and they didn't have an agreed value, the American dollar began to decline rapidly in value. And this was of great concern to the world, but especially to America, because America was the reserve currency. And we can't have a reserve currency that loses value. That means that everybody in the world is going to lose. And so the pressure was on. What was America going to do to preserve the value of the dollar? Would they go to war to protect it, for example? What they actually did was quite astounding. And we will cover that in the next episode of What is Going On in the World. Make sure you tune in, because this story hasn't finished.